Good evening, and welcome to Suffering in Silence with Evangelist Teal on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Love Bay family, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Our topic on this evening is the increase in human trafficking. We have with us our co-host, Bob Wood, and we have also as our guest, Mark Daria. If you have any questions or comments for our guest or our co-host, you can email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. You can also text us at 437-778-3299. If you have any resources that you would like to share with us on a national or local level from your country, your community, local organizations, or your faith community, you can also email us at sufferinginsilencedv@gmail.com. And with that, Bob, if you would take a moment to greet our listeners.
Thank you. Certainly, it's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me again. I work very, very closely with Evangelist Tia. I am the president of her 501c, Rising Out of the Ashes. So she keeps me in check. And I used to be the Title IX coordinator at Gwen and Mercy University, which is relevant to our guest tonight, and I'll let him explain that as we move forward from there. But as always, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, Mark, if you would take a moment and greet our listeners.
Certainly. First of all, good evening, everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and wonderful to be back again. I was here last year and very happy to speak on this topic that is so very important, and good to see some friends and familiar faces again.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So as usual, we want to start with sharing some resources. And also, again, Love Bay, just a reminder to throw it out there again. We are in a process of raising funds for our nonprofit, Rise Out of the Ashes. So if you would like to contribute, you can visit our GoFundMe page. If you go to the GoFundMe website, you can search us, Rise Out of the Ashes, Inc., if you would like to help us do what we do in supporting victims and survivors financially. A resource that we have, Pastor Darius Daniels. He's the pastor of Change Church. His website is dariusdaniels.com, and his YouTube channel is Darius Daniels TV. We have the National Domestic Violence Hotline. The website is thehotline.org, and their phone number is 1-800-799-7233. This is in the United States, and we just want to remind you, wherever you are, you can do a search in your country. You can look for your national organization, and they will direct you to local organizations that are closer to your home. We also have the Polaris Project, National Human Trafficking Hotline. Their number is 1-888-373-7888. Or you can text the words "Be Free," BEFREE. You can text the words "Be Free" to the number 233-733. And their website is polarisproject.org. Polaris is POLARIS. And then we have the Pennsylvania Coalition Against Rape, also known as PCAR. Their website is PCAR.org. So again, listeners, our topic on tonight, we're talking about the increase in human trafficking. And so what I want to do is share again, I believe we shared this book the last time that we were here on this topic. The book is called The Slave Next Door, written by Kevin Bales and Ron Sudalter. This is a very, very informative book. And so I recommend listeners and viewers that you get a hold of this book to find out more information on human trafficking. And I also wanted to share, and I believe that you can find this by country where you are, but in the United States, fairtradeamerica.org. If you want to be able to purchase some items where you're sure that human trafficking was not involved in the production of those items, you can go to fairtradeamerica.org. And then I really wanted to list or just give a couple sources. I don't drink coffee. So, and this is just an example. These stores, you don't have to worry about coffee beans being trafficked. in the web of human trafficking. So fair trade coffee can be an example offer at Caribou Coffee, Starbucks, Seattle's Best, Safeway, Giants Foods, Target, Dunkin' Donuts, and there are other shops. If you go to Fair Trade, you'll be able to find them. I just didn't want to say, because I know I said this before, don't shop at this place and that place, and don't. I wanted to give some places where you can go, or some an option of where you can look for a place that will help you as you're making decisions. I can't tell you how many times I have been standing in Target staring at a bag of M&Ms, wondering where the cocoa beans came from. I'm telling you, it's been a dilemma just standing there wondering. I know you can't do that every time you walk into a store trying to figure out what came from where, but there is a way to find some items that you can feel comfortable about purchasing. I found through Fair Trade America a couple places where I could order chocolate from, because I do like chocolate. Green and Black's organic chocolate is one of them. I actually was able to order through Amazon some of their chocolate, and it was really good. So again, all that to say, just wanted to throw some places out there in that website where you could go to look for some things that would have your conscience be free, if you think like like I do. So with all of that, Mark, I want to go to you, and if you could just start again, just a reminder or a refresher, if you could define for us what human trafficking is, and then
Absolutely. Very happy to. Please let me just give you a shout out for you stole some of my thunder, by the way, but that's okay because you did it better than I ever could. But no, you hit the point right on target, and that is that this is something that while it is a fascinating topic and an interesting topic and a pertinent topic, it's also a personal topic. It should mean something to each of us because it is an issue of global impact that affects virtually every country around the globe profoundly. And we'll explore some of that in the next 50 minutes or so. But to your point of what is human trafficking, there are various definitions of that. And as we go through this, there's going to be different source data, different definitions of things, but let's try to hone it down as close as we can. And human trafficking is usually linked to the illegal act of recruiting, transporting, transferring, or receiving a person through force, coercion, deceit, with the aim of exploiting them. It involves forced labor, sexual slavery, or commercial sexual exploitation. That's a fairly good representation for a definition.
Okay. So thank you for that. I think I want to ask you, given the actual title of our topic tonight, given what authorities know, and I mean across the world, given what authorities know, given what the general public knows and what we're ever learning, how is it possible that human trafficking could actually increase instead of decrease? Or at the very least have numbers. I mean, even though this is not good either, but have numbers that at least remain the same without increasing. How could it be with what we know, or what I think we all know, what I think authorities know? How could this actually increase instead of decrease?
Well, there's the quagmire, isn't it? Because I think the first thing we have to ask ourselves is, do people really know about this, and do people really acknowledge it on a conscious level? For example, when we talk about human trafficking, most people's minds will go to the sex trade, prostitution, and that is obviously a very large and disturbing part of it, but it's not the whole picture. That's part A. Part B is that the psyche itself is, when you start talking about prostitution, people's eyes glaze over because it's largely invisible and viewed as a victimless crime. So just to stay with this aspect of it, we can build out more what other aspects there are to human trafficking as we go on. But the sex trade itself is not just the typical strip club, call somebody online and have them come over to your place or whatever have you. It often involves some and this is where you have to look at it from the personal level. These are incredibly disturbing stories when you start getting into how does a person get to this place. You don't wake up and say, today I will go into the sex trade. Gee, that sounds like a career move. It's not. So how do people get there? There is a vast number of ways that people get there. Obviously, some of the more bigger issues would be drug or alcohol abuse, substance abuse in general, homelessness, runaways. Obviously, the sex trade is affecting mostly women, but not only women. It also affects men and boys, particularly little boys. So you've got that aspect of it that goes on. About 25% of the sex trade is involving underage, 18, defined as 18 and below, 25%. So, which is criminal on other aspects in most countries as well. So all of that is part of how this filters in. But but prostitution itself is not the only aspect of this. But as I said, people tend to just kind of glaze over at that point and stop thinking about it. And so they're not considering it. That's why I loved your intro where you're talking about coffee and chocolate. This is pervasive. And the other aspect of this that's large, taking up about a third of human trafficking is labor. Forced labor or labor that is, coerced, let's put it, it's probably the better word for it. And what does that mean? Well, it means in today's world, technology, the internet has become a major enabler in this regard. People in other countries are lured to prosperous countries, industrialized nations in the West and in Asia with the promises of lucrative jobs. And when they get there, oftentimes the front company will say, well, we'll pay for your airfare, we'll pay for your processing, your passport, et cetera, and we'll get you there. And when they arrive, they find out that they're being shoveled off to a restaurant to become a cook, or they're a construction worker or whatever have you. And they're just simply made to work. And then they're told they have to pay back debts because they've incurred these incredible amounts of money, $300,000 for airfare and stuff like this. And they have to work that off. So it's indentured servitude is the phrase we used to use for it. So they're beholden to these people to complete their tasks, which are often multi-year assignments. So another quick aspect, and I don't mean to hog the whole thing here. But I get riled about it. One aspect that we don't really talk about is the familiar aspect of it, that a lot of people are actually sold or traded into human trafficking from family members or spouses or significant others. So this is another thing that, again, you've got to start digging into this to really find out and learn about it. When the average citizen starts to hear about these things and learn about these things, they become, the righteous anger, they become rightfully engaged in it. But again, going back to the original position, is that more often than not, people just kind of think this is a victimless crime. Nobody's really getting hurt. People that are doing this are, willing to do it because even with contracted labor, they're better off here living in, 22 an apartment than they are in their own home country. Maybe true, maybe not.
Yeah. Well, I had a thought. Well, I had a couple of thoughts as you were speaking, but one of my thoughts, and then Bob, I'll go to you for a question or a comment. You talked about technology being an enabler, and I'm just thinking how technology should be on the other side of this, helping to prevent this, helping to discover it. When we talk about human trafficking and labor, I just think about my own process, all the jobs that I've had, and all that I had to do. And, just all the information that I had to provide, and like even to open a bank account. I mean, you have to show they want birth certificates and social security numbers and references. I mean, the job that I have now and the previous job that I had before, I think each one one of them I did like 5 interviews. I think the one before I did like 9 interviews, and they checked all my my personal information. So my question with that, well, not a question, but my comment with that, as it pertains to labor, if someone is coming to work for you, how does the employer drop the ball? I mean, how is it that some jobs require, I need your name, I have to do this background check, I need to verify all this information, and it seems if the job is, I guess, on a lower, I don't want a lower skilled level, a lower, maybe not, I don't know. If it's not C-suite, then, we just let things slide. I guess I just think there should be more emphasis on the employer to check this person is coming to work for you. You need to make sure that this person is here under in the right situation, the right correct pretenses, that they actually want to be there and they're not being forced to be there. This, I don't know. I hope that makes sense.
Was that directed to Bob or me?
Oh, both. Yep.
Okay. Well, I thought you said Bob when you started off, but if Bob, I don't know if you have a comment, but if you don't,
I'll comment after you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you. Because that is, you're hitting on a very great question here, is how does this happen? How does it happen? It happens because there's a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod going on. Mm-hmm. Now, none of the 3 of us are going to be victims of human trafficking. Just by the very questions you're asking by an interview, yeah. You're not going to be targeted. And this is something that we have to understand. Who is it that is targeted? It's people who do not know a country, i.e. people who are immigrating in legally or illegally, mostly illegally, because their options are few. They don't understand the legal system. They don't understand their rights. Oftentimes they don't understand the language. They certainly don't understand the culture. So these people become very easy prey. And this is the caveat, is that the traffickers, be they individuals, be they organized, or be they in a corporation. And I'm not bashing corporations. I'm not saying all corporations are evil. That's not, I'm an ardent capitalist, but I'm a fair guy. But you do have businesses, oftentimes in league with governments around the world, who are not concerned with these problems. What they need is production. They need quotas filled. They need things done. And they're not too concerned with how they get it done. Now, there's a whole nother layer to go into where a lot of countries have joint agreements, and I'm thinking mostly of the industrialized nations, Europe, United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, many of the Asia Pacific countries, where we can actually check on each other and go in and essentially make sure that most corporations are on the up and up, and that tends to hold. But there are certain countries, and I'll call out China on this, that have essentially, let's not kid ourselves. It's a communist dictatorship, and there is no real free independent businesses. They're linked to the government one way or the other, and they'll have corporations set up, and that will be showcased so that when an American business company comes over, or an organization, an NGO, a non-government organization comes over to verify the status, they'll take them out and they'll showcase. And these people are treated well. They're living in great housing. They're paid well. All the boxes are ticked and tied. But then they say, oh, well, we had to subcontract, and we can't be held responsible for what subcontractors are doing. Subcontracting, but you're a government agency, so you're subcontracting to yourself. So how do we not know this? And this is where we can even turn the blind eye and say, well, yes, I took a trip. I visited a couple of the sites. They were up to snuff. Everything's great. But no, you didn't go into the hinterlands. You didn't go into the places where the real production. And I'll call out again, not beating up China tonight, but the Uyghur population, which most people, and I've had them in classrooms where people have never heard of Uyghurs. They're the Muslim communities that live in the western province of China, who are basically exploited as slave labor. And you can dance around that and you can try to make nice of it, but that is the objective truth. And as I've said in classroom many times, never believe me. I could be lying. If I say something that strikes you or you're curious about, do your own research on it. The information is out there, and it's absolutely incredible what goes on. So let me stop. And Bob, I think you had something to say there too.
I'm just going to further your comments on what you're discussing. I mean, I can just tell you from my experience, in construction, frequently somebody wanders up to a construction site, and if they need labor on a construction site, there's not a whole lot of questions asked. Because I was one of the labor pool as a kid. And also, when I was in police work and in special operations, I was in a warrant unit, and frequently I would go to these daytime employment agencies. They never ask.
Right.
I'm taking that, I'm reversing that and throwing it on the police aspect of it, but frequently I would find somebody there with an open felony warrant, and you would think that somebody in an employment, process would be looking up on these things. But again, I just know that as you said, sir, it's a production. We need a body. We need to put the body in there, and let's get the first one that comes down the line. Mm-hmm. And there's not a whole lot of attention paid to a proper process in filling that void. Sad to say. And you can comment on this. I mean, this is a problem that's as old as people and history. Mm-hmm. And it's you look at it and sometimes you go, dear God, we're no further than the Dark Ages in many ways. It's repetitive. And I look at it, and the question I ask, and I was in law enforcement, and I'm Title IX coordinator, still dealing with law, is are the people, do we have adequate training for people in those positions that, they recognize it when they see it, or, they look for the signs? I mean, I can tell you right now, every police officer out there can tell you what a stolen car looks like, what a possible drug house on the block looks like, or this or that or the other thing. But I don't know what the training. I know when I was in, I'm going to date myself here, 1979. No, it wasn't even discussed.
Yeah,
it wasn't. And then I know, and honestly, when I left and I went into education, I ran a program in Baltimore City for high at-risk students, basically students who had been removed from every school in the city. But I had students whose family members, as you said, already had them on the street.
Yeah.
And I had a dual problem, a dual issue I had to deal with there. I'm dealing with the student. In fact, I would actually go get my students. They didn't show up, which shocked a lot of people in a lot of the housing areas. They're like, what are you doing here? I was coming to get my student. And here's another aspect of the problem I don't think some people understand. Frequently, when I went to find that student, they were the only person in the home bringing in any kind of money.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the rest of the family,
however it happens.
And that's the socioeconomic issues tied to this are as long as the problem itself. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's something, I know people, and the times we're in right now, everybody gets upset with saying, well, how many aid, programs are we going to have? And again, I look at other countries, and I was in the UK and I needed medical attention real quick. All I had to do was walk in. Mm-hmm. There's certain things we're still a little bit behind, and I think those socioeconomic issues compound some of these problems. if that's a fair statement.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I love what you hit on with the jurisdictional aspect of it, because there's so many things floating around in my mind as you say that. We're talking about this as being an international problem.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you govern international relations between states? Because every country jealously guards its borders, its internal affairs, and rightfully so. That's the nation state system. We don't want a neighboring country or countries from around the world delving in and saying, well, what are you doing in my city? You can't tell me how to run my city. And that's well and good. Having said that, we should be able to call it out. But jurisdictionally, even within nations, right? You're talking about the police force. Well, where you only have authority within your city lines,
right,
within a designated area. Well, listen, traffickers. Let's not kid ourselves. They are the furthest thing from stupid that we're going to encounter. They know everything we know, and they know how to get around it. Exactly. And they also know that invisibility cloak that they wear works in their favor. That all they have to do, and if things get too hot in Philadelphia, they can move to Hatboro or Horsham, the neighboring towns, and set up shop there and still do the same job, and they're out of jurisdiction because certain people are watching them and know what they're doing, but you can't touch them anymore. And that doesn't even talk about state or regional or international aspects of it. So information is stored and kept differently. There's different types of names that are used. Not all that data, despite even Interpol, right? A lot of that stuff is not cross-pollinated, if you will. So all of this provides a shield, that invisibility cloak I'm talking about for these people, and they know how to use it. So that's a large part of how does this happen. Besides the wink, wink, nod, nod is, look, bureaucracies, right? Bureaucratic inefficiencies. We talk about training. I'm thinking about as a law enforcement officer, when you're dealing with domestic violence, robberies, thefts, murders, spousal abuse, when you're dealing with all these things, how the heck do you find the time to ask if the gardener is legal?
Mm-hmm. That is an absolutely spot on fair statement. I mean, you're absolutely correct, because I'm sure it's changed somewhat since I've been in, because like I said, I dated myself, but I can distinctly remember we were also tasked with handing out summonses and minor warrants and all that. So in addition to answering your calls, you're knocking on somebody's door. Hi, is John Jones here? I got a summons for him. He needs to go to court. And of course, half the time you got to do that 22 times because nobody wants to actually take the summons. So that is an extremely pertinent question. And again, staying in that line, summers working a 4 to 12 shift. Before I even got in the car, I had 6 calls waiting.
Yeah.
For me to go answer.
And it can't happen. It just doesn't happen. And this is something that's got. I remember I was a property manager. You're talking about your experience. I was a property manager back in the 90s out in the Los Angeles area. And I used to get contractors do things. You have to, I'll tell you, the takeaway lesson was build your network. And it took I was at this one organization for about 7 years. And it took about 2 years to actually build a network of contractors and people that were trustworthy. And but I had incidents where we had a roofing job that had to be done on one property. And I hired this one guy who brought out, when the crew came out, there were North Koreans in the group. They couldn't speak any English. North Korea. Is anyone paying attention? North Korea and the United States don't have employment exchange agreements. So that whatever paperwork is being provided is not real. Because they tell you North Korea. That's all they can say. North Korea, not South Korea. North. Wow. Okay. Again, the subcontracting thing. We had painters that came out and they were bringing people in from Mexico. And look, hardworking, but illegal.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And there becomes, and again, going back to where you came into this, the chocolate, is one of my favorite stories, because most of our chocolate comes from West Africa. And we actually have agreements with West African nations that if you dust them off and look at them, they're perfect or near perfect. They're great. We're in agreement. Can't exploit child labor. You can't, do this. You can't do that. It's great. They look good, except the families are destitute. And they say, I don't care what agreements America's making with Ghana, you're going out today and you're going to bring back cocoa beans, bundles of them, and you're going to keep bringing them back for 14 hours a day because the family has to eat. So all those agreements, and Mars and Hershey and all the rest of these companies, they're trying. I'm not beating them up and saying they're not trying, but how do you do that when on the ground, the local level, and they're doing it because they have to eat.
Right.
They don't wake up in the morning and say, let me exploit my children. Now some countries actually do. Some peoples actually do that. And they say, well, I've got 12 kids to feed. So if I have to ferret out one or two, the other 10 are going to be okay. And they actually, I honestly don't know how you can make that mental calculation, but people do to survive. And the beauty of living in an industrialized country is that we don't have any inkling. We don't face those kinds of Sophie's choice moments, if you will, where we have to make those kinds of decisions. So I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here, but and you can't hold them to, our standards either. But at the same time, we do have a choice of looking at it and saying, well, if this is what you do, I don't condone it, and therefore I can't support it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's where, and some companies, I know McDonald's is really good at this. They'll actually have those posters regarding the coffee. They'll actually show that it's, where they're getting it from and that it's a free zone. And, so, I mean, the information is there. Education is part of, to go back to your first initial question, education is a very large part of it. What you're doing here now, the classroom, things like this are how we start to get people involved, because most people are consumed with the fight to survive.
Yeah.
We're trying to pay the mortgage, pay the car, pay the student loan, and we're trying to take care of our kids and our family. And that's as far as our vision goes. And things pop up on our radar occasionally, usually only in times of crisis. Mm-hmm. What we need to do is we need to lend that sense of urgency to this discussion and say there are things that can happen, because even during, again, talking about the interesting perspective of the traffickers, during the pandemic, obviously, person-to-person contact severely curtailed basically around the world, and you saw that dropping off in some of their usual venues like strip clubs, like massage parlors and the like. And so because the human contact wasn't there, but the internet increased, I think it was 140% of recruiting people. And so, it's coming through Facebook, it's coming through Instagram, were the two sources that I'm most familiar with on how to recruit people for human trafficking. And you sit there and go, what? But that's what's happening. And it's happening. And again, there are signs that, and this is, again, knowledge and education is part of this. There are signs that we can, and I know we explored this more in the class and we explored it last time I was on, we talked about it. I can take a minute and walk through them. I think it's worth it if you don't mind.
No, I don't mind. And I think it's a good idea because as you were stating before, and sometimes there's an issue of, a lot of times there is an issue of a family who feels though, the children have to work or we won't survive. So when we're dealing with poverty, I think that's one issue that it really is. But I think another huge part is the actual corporations who are just making money. They're making money hand over fist. So it's not one of these CEOs who's, I have to feed my family. No, it's these corporations that are making billions and billions of dollars off of child labor, off of the human trafficking. And I just see so many different pockets, so many different areas within this one situation, we can just pull out a million problems. Something needs to be done about the poverty. Something absolutely needs to be done about the corporation who has enough money to set up a false place over here to bring the officials to show them you put time, money, and effort into what is not real, to lie, to cover up the human trafficking, the deplorable working conditions that men, women, and children are in. You have enough money to do that, and still you're pulling out and using individuals to get more and more money. So I think it does. I think it's a good place to go into that and bring that as well.
Yeah, no, definitely. What just following up on what you're saying, I do think that this becomes a worldview question in that, and I spoke about this a lot, and I in virtually any class that I have, because I really do think it's a paradigm establishment, and that is human nature. And human nature, particularly in the West, we like to think that all people are essentially good and all people do the right thing. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But I also think that there's a lot of naivete in that. And I'm talking to a former cop, so
Yeah.
I know
You saw me chuckle right away.
I saw you laughing. but my point is that if we remove constraints and inhibitions, we can always count on man to go to his base instinct. And what is that? It's self-preservation, self-aggrandizement. It's promoting of self. Now that self may, if you're dealing with nicer people, extend to family and kin and friends. But essentially, the man's nature is self-centered, and so it is only an entity run by human beings. So what's a government? A government is run by human beings. If all human beings are fallible, then corporations are going to be fallible. Then governments are going to be fallible. Then institutions are going to be fallible. And the reason I'm drilling into this is because we are being increasingly sold the idea that there is perfectibility in the universe. There is not perfectibility in the universe. Communism, Karl Marx talked about the perfectibility of man. That's the major problem with communism, is that there is no perfectibility of man. And you're right, as far back as recorded history goes, and we've got some 5,000 years of recorded history going back to the Sumerians, and man looks an awful lot like he does today back then. We are technologically more advanced, obviously. We can do great things now. We can land men on the moon and everything else, but it's stuff they couldn't do. But that's window dressing. Man's nature is still the same. He still takes advantage of his brother. He still crushes the oppressed. He still takes advantage of people. He will try to steal if he can get away with it. So what does that say to us? Are we really expecting something different from corporations, from institutions, from governments? No. To expect them to be the answer is wrong. The answer is in this room, and it's the people who are listening tonight. The answer is getting people to understand the problem, understand that there is a problem, and then understand all of our responsibility to do something about it. I'll stop talking.
I just even just listening to you and you talk about the naivete and people assuming everyone is good, great, and just nice and kind. Is just I know that the world is not perfect, but I have to tell you, I've seen some things that I just would have never expected. Never. I would have never expected to see corporations and businesses as large as they are, who have so much, that would actually put small family size businesses completely out of business and ruin the lives of families just to get more on top of what they already have. I still am surprised at some of the things that I see happening today. I really am.
And you know where my mind goes with that? Go back to right after the Civil War, for the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. You know, it took a movement, the progressive movement in the early 1900s. Teddy Roosevelt coming out as a trust buster and breaking the backs of corporations, because America was being run by corporations. And this, again, this isn't unique. This isn't America bashing. This is part of our history. We don't teach history anymore. We get lectured on what history is, but we don't teach it. How about people go and investigate and find out for themselves what it is? Because that same stuff happened and it was stopped for a very long time. Not eradicated. This is my point. It will never be eradicated. And every person, every generation has to keep watch on what's going on, because you can't trust anybody in power. Now I'm sounding like a 60s radical, right? Now, but anybody in power, the old axiom, right? Absolute power corrupts absolutely. So even people who get in intending to do the best can be corrupt at the end of the day. And it's a slow precipice you go down, right? Because after all, I'm invested with power and authority. I know better than the people who are outside my window with placards protesting. Right? I know I'm doing a good thing for them. Why don't they understand that, those idiots? So it's easy to just send the police and shut them up. Except they're right to be outside my window with the placards. That's their right to express their opinions. But again, that's not a universal concept either. Many countries will shoot you for that.
Yeah.
I'm just going to comment on what you just said. We don't teach history, and you hearkened right to an era. Tia knows where I'm going to go with this. We have a government that eradicated a whole group of people in our country, and we're still having a hard time with that. The Native Americans, because I'm involved with the MMIW issues, and winding all of that together, going back to your initial statement of traffickers being very, very intelligent and knowing and plotting their field. People in this region, when I'm teaching about that particular topic, and I mentioned Philadelphia, Pennsylvania being right on the traffic circuit, they look at me and go, huh? I pick somebody up on the West Coast, up through Canada, come across the big highway, and I'm right down and out the eastern seaboard. And they looked at me and said, I never thought about it. I said, well, that's why I'm talking about it. It's, and I think that is where part of it is. We don't teach, and I'm going to steal a Lakota term, Matakawe Oyasin, we're all connected. If I'm over here doing this and exploiting this group of people, somewhere down the line, that is going to impact me. As you said, they may be somebody outside with the placard. That may be how the people protesting, eventually their nerves are frayed to the point of wall, and that protest turns into a riot. There's that concept of, and in the old African term, it takes a village to raise a child. I know inside that particular culture, older couples, or say somebody who was widowed or widower, they could not fend for themselves. Every warrior, hunter, whatever that went out was responsible for leaving something at their door,
right,
to make sure they were careful. We don't do that.
Yeah,
we don't do that. And I think what I have found fascinating, and please both feel free to comment on this, I have found in my travelings, particularly inside the reservations and working with people there, that those with less are the ones who actually give more.
Yes, always. That's
every time.
Everywhere. No matter what issue I'm helping out with or dealing with, speaking on, it is always the individual who has the least, who wants to do the most and is trying. If you're helping individuals, if you're dealing with domestic violence, sexual assault, missing and murdered Indigenous women, if you're dealing with drug and alcohol issues, if you're dealing with mental, emotional, physical issues, it always comes down to what I've seen in my personal experience. It always comes down to the individuals who have the least, and they have the biggest hearts, and they are willing to do the most, but don't have the finances and the resources to get the jobs done. And I've seen those with the resources, with the finances, with the connections, with the network, who do nothing. not to help in these issues. They do what is going to bring them more money to help them keep bringing in more money.
There, I'm just going with that, and I'm gonna flip it over to education for a second. I told you I ran that program, and these were students who just basically I was the last stop if they didn't do it. And you can think of all the social problems that were involved: gangs, drugs, as I said, people working the street, and we had an 85% success rate with that.
Mm.
And I had people from Hopkins, University of Maryland. I had people from all over studying this pilot program and talking about its success. And then at the end of 3 years, the government funding was pulled. We're successful, but we're going to pull the funding. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold it. You just taught these poor kids how to swim. Now you're handing them an anchor.
Right.
And it fascinates me because again, you're trying. You don't see the impact that's coming from this. This young person that we just got function can go back to school, get a GED, a high school diploma, whatever, and they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. Is this is what I should be doing? You just pushed them right back out there. You took it all away from them. And now they're going to be twice as angry because they've seen a better way, but now you won't let me have that better way. Yeah. And I understand that anger. It was I'll zip my mouth and I won't say the words that I said.
We may believe we didn't hear it. No, but this is what I'm saying about institutions, about bureaucracies, about governments, is that they can go so far, but only so far.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you've got somebody who has to answer to somebody else who has administrative orders to do this, cut the budget, do this, do that, and they have to do that if they want to keep their jobs. They can feed their family.
Precisely.
Politics is local, right? That's what O'Neill said. So they've got to feed their kids. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to do what I'm told to do, even if it's not right. So I pull the plug on programs that work. But hey, we save the government, i.e., the taxpayer, money.
Bingo. Yep.
But you didn't save the taxpayer money because now we're paying for them in rehab or in the
right.
jail system or whatever, or they just simply die tragically and they fall off our radar that way. So it's crazy. But the point that I think we're all bouncing around is that people who have been through tragedy in their lives have an incredible attribute of empathy. And if there's anything that can be taken away from horror or tragedy in your life, it's that you can turn that into something to understand, to help another person. Because if you can get through it, so can they. Yes. And I know, and I'm a kid who grew up in the Bronx, and I did my undergraduate at Pepperdine in Malibu. And let me tell you, that's, I wanted a 180 and I got a 180.
That's a big paradigm shift.
Not slamming on the people in Malibu. I love the people in Malibu, but there's a different perspective on the way to look at the world. And I'm still, to this day, I'm still a kid from New York, and I never will lose that. I don't want to lose that because that's, to me, that's my forming grace, and I think I turned out fairly good. This is for compliments, folks.
Well, I agree with that, Mark. I agree very much.
We have 2 votes here. We'll get the other ballots as they come in. You're right. Because what you just said, Tia, you and I discussed this. It was myself and my mother for the longest time. As you can see, I have 2 names, McComas Wood. I don't know the McComas aspect. Gone, out. And I'm not crying about it, but it definitely had an impact on how I viewed the world, how I formed, how much I wanted to succeed or not succeed at something. And it certainly impacted my mother. And as I said, I distinctly remember my mom in the kitchen, never went to bed hungry. However, frequently had, like scrambled eggs for dinner or something like that, something that, and I can remember her trying to figure out, yeah, you got it. And, corned beef hash in the can was, here we go. Hey, we're having meat tonight, but she was figuring out how to stretch $5 for the week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So again, and it's funny because in that aspect, I don't know if you ever had this. My mother looked at me one time And she said, "You are going to struggle in this world." I said, "What do you mean, Ma?" She said, "You don't do well with injustice. You're going to have a hard time."
Wise woman. She's a wise woman to boot.
Yes,
Yes, right.
Well, you know what? That breakfast thing, yeah. There are some things you don't realize until you become an adult. But there were many nights we had eggs for dinner. We had grits, but we thought we were lucky. We thought, wow, we get to eat breakfast for dinner. We didn't realize until we were really adults, what was going on. But, Love Bay, one thing I really do want to say, I want to emphasize, we all have our own lives. We have our situations. Some of us are tragedies that we've been through, but you do not have to experience tragedy. You do not have to experience hard times to have a heart, to have common sense, to want to help. All of us don't have the same experiences, but there's information that you can learn, and then you go forward, and you move that way. So I don't want anybody to think, I haven't experienced domestic violence, I haven't experienced alcoholism, I haven't experienced human trafficking, so I can't help. No, that is not what we're saying. Now we're in a different position because there is an empathy, there is a compassion that comes when you have experienced something. But at the end of the day, we all can be a decent human being who wants to help and do our part. And everybody can't do everything, but we can all do our part. And Mark, I had a question. I was thinking about it on our previous program. We did say, that oftentimes victims and survivors of domestic violence are also victims and survivors of human trafficking. So I wanted to ask, so does it stand to reason that since the numbers of human trafficking are increasing, can we say that the numbers of domestic violence and sexual assault are increasing as well?
I think you can draw a very clear line between economic hardship and domestic violence. Also alcoholism, which is a direct line to that as well. And I mean, these things, none of these operate in isolation. They feather into each other. So again, when people are struggling to survive and trying to figure out how they get their next meal, we start to consider options that were beforehand never viable. And we can go to our base, going back to my original thought, we go back to our base nature. And, we all love each other when everything's great, but, that's easy. But when I'm unemployed and the bank is, I'm 3 months behind on my mortgage and the bank is coming after me, and all of a sudden, taking a little extra cash out of the tinderbox, that doesn't sound like a bad idea. And, okay, so a fruit basket was left on somebody's door for their birthday. Well, they're not going to miss it. They'll get other gifts. So we start to rationalize our own misbehavior. And again, I'm not trying to beat people up. I'm trying to call attention to this is where we get. And to your point, Tia, is that we don't need to do this. And that's the beauty of living in a society like the United States. And not everyone has that ability, obviously. Just some 370 million of us, but that's not a small number. And there are resources. There are places to reach out to. There are people who can help, people who are willing to help without strings attached. And I'm sitting here talking about human nature, and I'm not trying to paint a negative issue, because there are people who will throw themselves on hand grenades for you too. And we shouldn't make believe that doesn't happen. But what was that old trust but verify? There's or maybe a better saying is, fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me. I give everybody one opportunity, when I meet them. But once you lie to me, once you try to steal from me, you got to dig a hole. You got a large hole to climb out of. And maybe you never will. So maybe I'm not as forgiving a person as I can be, but I'll take that up with my maker when I get there. It works for me.
Well, Mark, we often say, there is a difference. You do have to have boundaries in your life.
Absolutely.
And forgiveness and trust are two different things.
Absolutely.
Two different things. So I think you're moving along the right track there.
And I think, Tia, you made both of we kind of all made a very good point here tonight. And I know it's a trite old statement, but it's like the little boy with the starfish on the beach.
Yeah.
I can't save them all, but I can help that when it mattered.
Bob, I have to tell you, I just ordered one of
Starfish.
the little, yeah, I ordered the sign with the little story on it. I got it.
I mean, I've always said it, because I'm the guy that when I see somebody, I'll try to give them. Do you need a sandwich? Do you need a sandwich? I'll get you a sandwich. You need this. And somebody said to me one time, "Well, what if they just go get drugs or alcohol?" I said, "It doesn't negate what I'm trying to do."
Right.
And how do you know that's what they're going to do?
Yep, right.
But again, no, I can't save everybody, but it mattered to that particular person. And I think that's the premise to move forward for most people. So.
Yes.
See, I do not believe in accidents, and I believe that people's paths cross for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
And so that when we are in someone's life or they're in our life, it is for a purpose. And what we should always be striving for is that betterment. That we should always leave people in a better place than where we found them, and that's a philosophy of life, and we can adapt that and make a difference.
Yeah, and that's a good philosophy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we are just under the hour. I want to share again the website fairtradeamerica.org. I believe whatever country you are in, if you do a search for products that are fair trade, do that search and you'll be able to find information. And I had shared this website with actually one of my daughters, and we were talking about it and some of the products that you can receive in fair trade may cost a bit more, but they're guaranteeing that these products were not produced using human trafficking or child labor. And my daughter made a beautiful point. She said, if you can afford it, you should do it. So it's like, if you can, you should. If you can't, if you have to make a decision to go left or right, to buy this, not buy this, or do whatever, you're making the best decision that you can for yourself and for your family. That is great. That is just understood. But if you can do it, if you can, make a difference, then you should. And I just think that was beautiful for her to say. I really do. I want to share again the Polaris Project National Human Trafficking Hotline. Their number is 1-888-373-7888. Or you can text the words "Be Free," BEFREE. You can text the words "Be Free" to the number 233-733. And their website is polarisproject.org. Mark, do you have any resources that you would like to share? Or
what I will do, because I know we're down to about a minute and a half, I did want to look at that some of the signs, and what I will do is I will send them to you so you can post them.
Yeah, I'll do that, but we'll take a few more minutes. So if you want to share some of that information now, we can.
Oh, okay, great. I mean, some of it, and again, this isn't meant to be an all-inclusive list, but I do have something here that, in a very large sense, some of it's common sense. But as we're looking around in our neighborhoods, because this is what we need to understand. This is happening around us. This isn't stuff that's happening in Times Square and on Sunset Strip, and so we don't really have to worry about it. This is happening in Ohio, is the 5th most trafficked state in the U.S., for example. California, the largest, Florida and Texas, 2 other big places. So I mean, this is happening all around us, and we already mentioned like the domestic workers and stuff that we're not really paying attention to because they're just cleaning in the background, or the gardeners are doing their thing. We're not really thinking about it. But here's a couple of points. Frequently running away from home, inability to attend school on a regular basis, and or unexplained absences. References made to frequent travel to other cities. Bruises and other signs of physical trauma, withdrawn behavior, depression, anxiety and fear, talking to other people, this, keeping the head down. And that's not to be confused with shyness, but these are things to keep an eye on. Lack of control on personal schedules, lack of identification or other personal documents, hunger, malnutrition, signs of drug addiction, a big flag on that. Coached or rehearsed responses to questions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Uncharacteristic promiscuity vis-a-vis the age group, specific notes, references to a boyfriend or girlfriend who is noticeably older than the age group in question. These are just some of the ideas, again, not meant to be an all-inclusive list, but we also, if we're encountering this and we're seeing this, and this is pertaining largely to underage or younger people, because there's such a huge proportion of them involved in this, it's okay to ask questions. Are you okay? Are you safe? And there are plenty of government organizations. There's certainly local police and law enforcement you could call, but there's also hotlines. There's plenty of opportunities to help these people if they say, you get that answer that no, I'm not safe.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what do I do now? Well, there are options on there. So first thing is awareness, education, then awareness. Then taking the next step is, what can I do about that? And it doesn't mean you have to do anything about it, because no one should be putting themselves in physical harm either. You don't want to be dealing with traffickers and get yourself shot.
Mm-hmm.
But you can certainly gather information, and pass that along to appropriate authorities, and let it go from there. So again, we need to take this in and personalize it. We need to be aware of it. We need to understand that it is happening around us. And the statistics are amazing. I mean, it's like in the United States alone, it varies country to country, but it's something like 4.6 out of every 1,000 people is being trafficked. So every one of us knows 1,000 people, be they colleagues at work or extended networks through school or university. Everyone knows at least 1,000 people. So that means 4.6 of them, 5 people, are trafficked. 1 in every 200, to bring the number down.
Mm-hmm.
That's somebody right now. You're exposed to somebody. Each of us are. And so the first thing is, be looking for these things, be aware of it, and we can make that difference.
So, you can go, Bob.
I was going to say, speaking from a teacher and a coach aspect, some of the things you described there, especially if you're dealing with younger people, you have to be on top of those scenarios. Number one, they're your students. You should, I think I know my students better than some other people know them, and
Sure.
And you should be right on top of that. And I know sometimes people are hesitant to ask because of the angst that'll come behind it. But I've always said that, it's better that somebody's angry than somebody gets hurt.
Yep.
They'll get over getting angry. They're not going to get over being hurt or continuing to be hurt. So.
And it's funny you say that too, because I know in the teaching environment, a lot of people are afraid that they'll overstep the authority of the institution. And again, I know that that's an idea that's out there, and I'm sure that there are people. I got to tell you though, from the people that I know that I am closer to in the teaching environment, I have never come across that. People would lose their job if they could help one person. They're not afraid of that, and that always instills me with a great deal of confidence. So, and look, teachers are an authority figure, right? So if people are going to turn to someone, this is a place. That's a position where they're going to. Coaches, people who have a sense of trust, that there's a familiarity, and people that are in these positions, they too should be taking this very seriously and never be afraid, because you know what, I can get another job. And I'll tell you, I'd hire somebody who got fired for helping a human being. Those are the people I want working for me.
We'll talk about mine sometime.
So I think that all is a very great point, which is, in my mind, I'm thinking just be prepared. I took the class that Professor Daria teaches on human trafficking, and I remember at the end of the course, as we were going through, one of the questions that was asked of the students a scenario was put before us, and the question was, what would you do? And I think being able to be prepared with the website, with the phone number,
Always.
and how you would address the situation. So being able to just to walk that out, I think, is great preparation. Now, me, because of what I do, like, I already had the answer because of what I do. But I mean, it is great to know that, if I do come across a person, especially those of us who are in positions of authority, if you are clergy, if you are a teacher, if you're an officer, what would you do? And it may be just having a conversation, asking a couple questions. It may be just making yourself available, letting the person in front of you know that you are a person that they can come to, that they can share something with. And then being able to share the Polaris Project, the website, and a phone number, or being able to share 911 if that is what you can do. But I think preparation is a huge part on knowing what to do if you run into this situation, or if you have an inkling, if you think something may be going on, if you've seen some warning signs, what would you do in advance? I think that's a great thing. All of us can do that. All of us, you can learn more. Absolutely. And you can be prepared. And again, as Mark said, no, we're not talking about anybody, jumping in front of bullets or anything like that. You're not going to walk out your front door going to look for human traffickers. No. But if you see something that's not right, if you are in a spa and things, don't look right, you should have in your mind, yep. What would I do? What would I say? Mm-hmm. So we do. We have a few more minutes, 4 or 5 minutes. And Mark, I want to give you that time. I want to leave you with the last few minutes. What would you leave Love Bay with? And again, human trafficking is an issue. It is international. It's an issue with law enforcement. It's an issue with corporations. It's an issue with the public. And I have more questions than I do answers on the topic still. But what would you leave us with on tonight?
I think that one of the things, and you kind of alluded to it when you were talking about the class, you have a heart for this. So even though you were troubled at points, you were right on it and digging in deep. I know from experience teaching the class that a lot of students just don't cope well. It's really disturbing, and I think the mental attitude is part of what needs to be addressed here. We talk about education. We talk about being ready to jump in and help and having the answers. We also have to understand how dark and ugly this is and what it does to people, and it destroys lives. Even people who get out, survivors, are still dealing with the depression and the ramifications of the damage that's been done to them as a human being. So this is so deep and so pervasive. And I think, again, not trying to scare people, not trying to turn people away from that, but I think we also have to be mentally prepared for when we ask that question and we, as I said before, and we get we get an answer. We need to be ready for that. Up here, in here, and be ready in here to deal with those things. And again, all doable. It's like anything: awareness, education, preparation. And if we're doing that, and when you start to think about it, 1 in 200 people, someone who is trafficked or has been trafficked. That starts to drive it home. And some neighborhoods, that number's way distorted. Is there an opportunity to help? Yeah, I mean, you can reach out to churches and find out in your neighborhood, or synagogues or what have you, and find out if they're doing any kind of programs. Again, battered, and this goes not just trafficking, but battered women fall into this as well. They have no options. People who are have unstable housing, and it's not even homelessness, but unstable housing, are a susceptible group. And that's what traffickers target. They're targeting susceptible groups. Indigenous people rank high, Bob, on that scale as well. So it's people who, again, they're somewhat on the fringe of society for whatever reason. Those are the easiest candidates, and because they live in a level of fear. Illegal immigrants are afraid of being caught, so they're more easily manipulated. People who are afraid of the system, don't understand the system, have cultural or linguistic inhibitions. This is the kind of stuff. These are the susceptible groups. These are the people who we need to be watching out for the most.
Yes.
As I said, it's not the college educated who have been through and come from and have a social network and a familial network that's relatively stable, all things considered. It's people who are on the fringe of society. That's the weak and vulnerable, and that's where evil preys. And so that's what we should be paying attention to. And so. Again, get educated. And again, let me just start out what I said, or finish up what I said earlier. If anything in this conversation that we've had in the last hour strikes anyone listening, do your investigation. There are resources. Minister Tia supplies some of that on her site. I'd make myself available to that too. Anything that can be done to help, is serious. We should be willing to help.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. And I want to mention again the book, The Slave Next Door. This is written by Kevin Bales and Ron Sudalter. I could not read this book in its entirety. I couldn't do it. But it is an awesome resource. But some of the stories were too much for me. But it is a great resource if you want to learn more of human trafficking. Love Bay, go buy some coffee from Starbucks, Target, or Dunkin' Donuts. Thank you so much, Mark, for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
For being here, and absolutely, Mark, we would love for you to come back. I would love to be able to have a conversation that says that there is a decline in human trafficking. That'd
be wonderful.
That would be awesome. But we would love for you to come back and be with us at some point. Love Bay, if you want to catch up on previous episodes from our program, you can visit our YouTube channel, Suffering in Silence DV. We thank you so much for joining Suffering in Silence with Evangelist Tia on Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. We're here with you every Friday evening at 7 p.m. Eastern. Love Bay, we are continuing to rise out of the ashes together. Good evening.